To begin with, Zen philosophy teaches us the importance of a basic point of view. We're all functioning from some kind of a general pattern within ourselves. If that pattern is badly organized, the point of view is badly organized. And as we go out into the daily problems of life, we're not strong, because there is no essential strength available in the pattern of our own convictions. Zen moves on the basic premise that beneath all confusion there is a moving universe that never hastens and never slows down. In this moving universe, there are really no storms. For this movement is like the deep current of an ocean. The surface of the sea may be agitated by winds and by various storms. And along the shore, the ocean breaks violently. But down in the deeper parts of itself, the sea is forever the same. And in these deeper parts, the laws of the sea are unchangeable. In the upper air where we live, there are also great currents moving. These air currents are affected by high and low pressure areas to create storms. But as the small boy in school said, weather is forever changing, but climate remains about the same. And this is the principle on which we are thinking. Climate in ourselves. We either live inwardly in a good climate or a poor one. Now there are people around us in this world who seem to choose all kinds of unusual climates. There are folks that are really never happy except in Death Valley, where they can enjoy the temperate atmosphere at about 125 degrees in the shade and no shade. There are others who can hardly wait to get back to some forlorn, wind-swept mountain, or perhaps back to the Arctic with its long and terrible winters. These climates please some people. And fortunately, the world can provide climate suitable to almost any taste. In the moral and emotional climates of life, we find the same diffusion. But experience tells us that the world's work is done mostly in a temperate zone. It is in the areas where climate helps rather than hinders the fullest expression of man's cultural instinct that we have developed the great arts and sciences, and more recently, the great industries. Where a man has to fight climate continually, or is overwhelmed by it into lassitude and inertia, it is very difficult to maintain a strong, steady, creative pace. So it is also in ourselves that the best work of man is accomplished when his inward life is temperate. Now, the temperate life does not mean one in which there are no changes of any kind, but rather one in which changes are natural and gradual and not extreme. If we live with a personality or a temperament which is given to extremes, whether that personality be our own or the temperament of someone near to us, these inconsistencies and extremities of moral temperament or climate present numerous troubles and problems keep us nervous and edgy and forbid the natural relaxation of the mind in the presence of securities. So in Zen, there is an effort at what we term quietude. But this is not the kind of negative quietude that simply sits back and takes what comes. It is not that the person is intended to be passive. Rather, that this temperature which he creates, this temperance in his own life, is the product of a great deal of foresight and courage and strength. If it was really true that the unconditioned person, the one in whose life there is very little personal integration, if it was true that this resulted in any kind of general good, we would have noticed it long ago. But it does not. Nor is it right to say that quietude is weakness. If it was weakness, most persons would have it, because we all share magnificently in the assorted weaknesses of our kind. But apparently the quietude that we seek is extremely difficult. It is arduous to attain. It requires constant vigilance. It must come from the best and richest effort of ourselves. Therefore, we cannot regard it as negative. When it is perhaps the highest goal of man, this certainly is not the easiest thing for him to accomplish. He can do nothing and fall into the inclemencies of his own climate. But he must labor very hard to keep a pattern of purpose that will direct him along the course of life. To our Western way of thinking, this labor is almost too much for us. We cannot hardly imagine the condition in which we could move placidly from day to day. We read about it, hear of it in the lives of saints, wish we could do something about it, and then proceed to gather another tornado in our private conduct. To meet this, then, the Oriental mind has developed this doctrine of Zen, which became the moving force behind a variety of other doctrines and other concepts and beliefs and attitudes. This Zen produced a magnificent flowering of art in Asia. It gave us what to the Oriental is great music, though we may not understand it. It gave to these Eastern people a thoroughness, a depth of life, and perhaps an ability to really live while they were alive. There was not so much of the regret that burdens Western living. Yet we do not really want to believe that our Asiatic brethren are built of so much better stuff that they can accomplish good that is beyond our attainment. They would be the last to say this themselves. They would simply point out that they are just like everyone else. The problems that they face, the degrees of insight which they possess, are not different from our own. And we know this because great currents of weakness also appear in their natures, just as they appear in ours. All of the East is not one grand meditating philosophy of life. It is disturbed by every problem that we face. Yet perhaps specialization has given a certain advantage in areas. Our specialization has given us the most rapid advancement in science that has ever come to the world. Another man's specialization resulted in great music. Still others in the advancement of ethics and economics and law, medicine. In Asia, specialization upon a contemplative life has given certain advantages in this area, though these same people may be deficient in hygiene and eugenics and many phases of learning with which we are acquainted. Somewhere along the line, we need to recognize the importance of bringing together the good things of the world. That if a man has achieved uniquely in some area, he has made a contribution that is important to all men. Today we are taking hygiene to the most distant parts of the earth. We are fighting desperately with teams of physicians and scientists to cope with the plagues and problems of the world's health. We are seeking through the United Nations to cope with the problem of man's emotional inconsistencies as they express themselves on the level of his political conduct. So we take our offering to other people. Some are grateful, some are not. But this is not our essential problem. Our problem is to do that which we can do, the best of our ability to contribute to a common good. But in this process of trading for security, which it amounts to, there also has to be a two-way merchandising. Perhaps one of the reasons why we've had some trouble with people, particularly in our efforts to advance them in their own fields of endeavors, is because we have not recognized exchange as an important part of the psychological life of man. When we go to some other person and deluge him with gifts and opportunities, and of course, mostly with recommendations, he may become pauperized in his own consciousness. No one wants to forever receive. A person who receives wants to compensate. He wants to give something in his turn, so that this will be a fair procedure. If, therefore, we exchange our knowledge with other people's, it is only right and proper that we also consider what they know and try to indicate some reciprocity, to let them know that they have contributed in some way to our well-being. Out of this comes the spirit of fraternity, of sharing. It is not good only to receive. It is also important to give. And we must give back and forth and receive each from the other if we are to protect the essential dignities of human life. So as we go into these other lands, our physicians and scientists have begun to look into the ancient beliefs and healing methods and herbs and simples and chemistries and psychologies of these other nations. This procedure of seeking the help of the people we help has paid off very well to date. It has brought us knowledge which 100 years ago we would have been too blind and stubborn to accept. And we are a better people because we have explored the cultures of the various groups which we are seeking to serve. Now, the same is true on the level of philosophy. There is much that we need that has been developed in the lives of other people. Our Western culture is comparatively young. We have had much experience with adolescence, but very little experience with maturity. Nor have we been able to get this detachment that comes from a long contact with the inconsistencies of existence. Therefore, when we go to an ancient people that has a long tradition and a long record of struggling with essentially the same problems that we face, it is well, perhaps, to listen to the old men, the wise ones, those who are the custodians of the wisdom of their own people, and see if we cannot gain a few important points that might be useful to us. This is especially true if the people to whom we go, these wise men with whom we discourse, are really old and wise and highly cultured and well advanced in civilization. Such groups exist. One of these groups is more or less represented by the Zen contribution to Western life. Zen is not a doctrine created to convert people. It is not a proselyting idea. It does not seek to change a person's religion, nor to influence him in a way unreasonable or unwelcome to himself. It is not followed by any armament to enforce its doctrines. It does not declare that the non-believer will go to perdition. It simply offers, out of its own experience, certain lessons. And as our own conditions become more strenuous, and we have to deal with a very strenuous way of life, it is interesting to note that it was for such a way of life that Zen was originally formulated. Zen was not originally meant to take care of the spiritual needs of meditating monks. It was intended to bring security of consciousness to shopkeepers, to soldiers, sailors, diplomats, scientists, agriculturists. It was supposed to enrich the lives of people who had to live every day in a world that was not too kind to them. It tried to help men both to live and to die. It sought to give them reasons for conduct that was right and proper, and defenses against the pressures of negative conditions which are forever moving in upon our rather immature philosophical points of view. So we have this one basic thought in connection with Zen, and that is that by a kind of philosophical non-resistance, an individual comes into a condition in which he can best enlighten his own consciousness. It does not necessarily follow that we can be non-resistant in everything. A great deal of discrimination is necessary. But it is true that as we advance in understanding, we become better able to control our own moods. And as we control our own moods, we come to the realization that there are many things that we strive to resist, and around which we create a structure of resistance, many things which do not even have a real substance. We are not always resisting evil situations. Many times we are only resisting our own interpretation of something. The world in which we live, therefore, is not always a real world. We think it is. But there are old beliefs about the non-reality of matter which have some validity, although no one can declare that all physical things are illusions. Still, there is a certain non-reality about the world, and Zen tries to bring this to our attention. We read the paper, we listen to our favorite commentator, maybe we subscribe to some special service to take care of our investments. If we do, we have been deluged in recent years by the worst news that these services could provide. They are all utterly pessimistic. Out of a few such things as this, we believe we have a fair picture of the world in which we live. Actually, we know almost nothing about it. There's an old saying, you know, that a traveler visiting a distant country must either stay for 3 days or 30 years. Any other interval of time is a mistake and a waste of time. In 3 days, the traveler is convinced that he knows all there is to know. He has visited the principal monuments of the community. He has done a little shopping in the favorite bazaars. He has read a few pages of a guidebook. He has walked the streets for 2 hours, and he is ready to go on to other worlds to conquer. He now knows the country. From this point on, the longer he stays, the less he will know. This will continue until he has resided in the nation or country about 30 years. Then a new kind of knowledge will begin to arise within him. And this new kind of knowledge will be an internal knowing, a knowing of things long and carefully weighed and considered. Knowing not based upon a half a dozen incidents or circumstances, but based upon a continual experiencing of the lives of these people. Thus he will gradually come to really understand. It is the same way with the problems of life. We may, with certain efficiency, on the surface of things, arrive at important conclusions about everything at the breakfast table. After having read a few lines or a page or two of world affairs, we are caught up in the superficial opinions that we have heard, in the news reports of other persons who perhaps did not know either, but who have a good reputation for knowing something. And in a little time, our attitudes are made up. Worse than this, however, is the lingering within us of a primordial attitude, arising from childhood, arising from the conditioning of our own homes, arising from the political and intellectual views of our ancestors, so that substantially educated to a point of view, we live through life allowing everything we learn and hear merely to support this point of view. Whether the point of view is right or not, we do not know. The only thing we know today is that this procedure is bringing us into a condition of perpetual conflict with life. We are unhappy, restless, worried. And against these negative pressures, there seems to be no adequate positive point of consciousness. Thus we are moved like the surface of water by every storm of the political and economic world. The price of coffee goes down in Brazil and the whole world shakes with fear. This kind of thing has become our way of life. We are in emergency which we cannot control. And gradually our peace of mind and our natural optimism are undermined until we live in a comparatively inadequate way. Zen moves in on this picture, or into this pattern of things, by simply reminding us that we can fool ourselves better than anyone else can accomplish this job. And by the time we get our own minds totally confused, we are in a good way to suffer for the rest of our lives. Against this possibility is the gradual conquest of confusion. That, in a measure, is what Zen seeks to do. It seeks to get the inconsistencies out of our thinking. Now, many persons believe that they can suddenly shift from a wrong point of view to a correct one, and then proceed. It is very difficult, however, to thus change horses in the middle of life's stream. Most do not actually succeed in accomplishing this, because they must work against all the old habits that they have. To announce formally to our own minds that from now on we're going to think better does not mean anything at all, because the mind will keep right on thinking as it always has. It will not change by any such solemn pronouncement. The only way the mind can change is by being re-educated. And it will fight like a stubborn child every effort to improve it. It will continue to follow its habits that we have built up, just as we may have injured the character of a child through years of spoilage or neglect, and then we have to live with the child. This is the mind's problem. We've ruined it. Now we have to live with it. And a few affirmations or noble resolution will no more change the mind than it will the character of a child that has been badly brought up. Zen says, therefore, there's only one thing to do. You've got to go back and start over again. Now, in order to go back, you do not retrogress to infancy, although the New Testament points out that it is of small children that the kingdom of heaven is made. We have to go back, however, to simplicity, which is no longer a sign of childhood, but perhaps the greatest sign of maturity that man can attain. We must slowly disentangle thought processes. The simplest and most direct way that Zen has ever been able to recommend this procedure is by setting up a machinery by which the person undeceives himself about his own mistakes, no longer recognizing them as good, no longer considering them as necessary. It is not possible or practical in this world for a person seeking understanding to simply depart from his society, go off in the wilderness somewhere, and contemplate upon eternal verities. This is not Western man's way of life. Fortunately, this is not necessary. For the problem always involving Western man is depth psychology. To get down far enough into the ocean of his own being to get below this surface of tempests. In each person, there is this deeper life. One way that we know it is a deeper life is that up to now it has never bothered us at all. It's interesting to recognize that from the so-called depths of man, very few reports are ever received. We talk, for example, of this inner life as having something about its quality that reminds us of God. And to the Zen concept, the universe itself is a perfect example of the Zen way, because this path is based upon Zen. One way that we experience this Zenness in life is that life is entirely impartial about things at which we take most partial attitudes. If someone doesn't please us, doesn't live the kind of life we think is right, we do not observe that nature becomes very much disturbed over this. There is no indication, for instance, that Republicans get more rain than Democrats. There is no indication that the farms of one sect are better than the farms of another sect, unless one of these sects knows more about farming. Then there might be a major difference. There is nothing to indicate that people who disagree with us are punished in space. All we can do is get mad at them and assume that that is the greatest misfortune that can occur to them. Perhaps they are glad to see no more of us. Actually, nature appears, as we find in the Sermon on the Mount, to send its rain upon both the just and the unjust. In nature, these innumerable distinctions which we set up, and which often become the most sorely battled points in our entire careers, are of no natural importance whatsoever. We have made them great, but they are not of real significance. So Zen points out that in nature, when a man misbehaves, the hand of God does not suddenly arrive out of space and spank him. He apparently is allowed to misbehave until he learns better himself. As long as nature does this to man, he may be able to involve it in a concept that is useful to his own needs. Namely, that as we go back to the roots and causes of things, as we go back to self or to God or to consciousness, we find in these core areas of our being not tremendous pressing directives, but a very strange quietude. The God in everything seems to be the peace in that thing. Its only manifestations that we can really comprehend at all are its gentle regards for our needs. As we go deeper into our own consciousness, we observe that the surface of the mind is in constant agitation, but the depths of the mind are nearly always in a state of comparative quiet. So to get to this root of things, we do not create quietude, we do not create peace of mind, we do not fight our way desperately against chaos until perhaps we mold it into some semblance of cosmos. The values that we need are always here. They are always working. They are ever operating. It is our need to reach the levels of them, to find some simple and reasonable method of clearing ourselves from the superficial pressures that agitate our dispositions. So Zen follows very largely the world's mystical concept, that we must get depth, that we must find more realities, and in so doing, we come upon an area of ourselves that is stronger than any situation in life that we can face or are required to meet. To attain this end, Zen uses a series of sharp instruments. Some of them probably are too sharp for the Western thinker. Zen, of course, ridicules false values. It creates a series of cartoons, even going so far as to embody these in its symbolic arts. Cartoons of exaggeration, in which by irony, which is the old Socratic method, it makes the individual come face to face with his own foolishness. Zen sets forth a pattern of ridiculing that which is unreasonable. Now, no one wishes to appear ridiculous, and sometimes to save face, we will make changes in our natures that we would never make for any real or moral reason. So Zen uses this ironical technique. It establishes a very strong, severe discipline and punishes right roundly here and now that monk who departs from the discipline. Zen, however, does not end on this negative note. If it did, it would destroy most of our purposes. Zen, again, in a rather Socratic manner, presents its disciples with a series of extremely simple but dramatic statements. Patterns of words so short, so mysterious in their simplicity, that they stop us in our tracks. We are all prepared for the man who is going to persuade us in 25,000 words. We settle back and try and attempt to sleep through it. However, when we are suddenly faced with a sentence of 6 or 7 words, in which we observe a tremendous depth. We are highly challenged, and we instinctively seek for meaning. If we are faced with this type of condensed utterance repeatedly, we develop a habit, the habit of searching for meaning. So the Zen uses a little poem or a little statement of a few words, seldom over 20 syllables, to point out or point up value, the meaning of something. And he tosses this sentence at us with tremendous intensity, as though to bewilder. If we have confidence in the basic integrity of the subject, we are caught with this sentence. We do not know just what to do with it. We are afraid to throw it away because there may be a treasure hidden in it. We may be wrong because sometimes these sentences are created merely for us finally to cast them aside because we have the sense to realize that they did not mean anything. But somehow we must decide. Each of these little structures and patterns is a test. And all this testing is simply to remind us that we cannot pass by anything without giving it consideration. The more energy we devote to consideration, the less energy we will have left for feuding and for worrying. If we must worry about something, let us try to worry about the fact that we may be misunderstanding something, as suggested by these little poems. Then a great Zen artist like Sesshu will show us in tremendous sweeps of black and white line what he has discovered under the surface of mountains, of valleys, of roaring streams, and of peaceful landscapes. Everything that is touched by Zen becomes dynamic, yet its dynamic is within itself. It is not something that obviously leads us or teaches us, but it is something that causes us to question, to reorganize our own thinking, to seek for meaning. And sometimes these symbols are so beautifully arranged that they create a deep response from somewhere in the less explored regions of ourselves. In the presence of truly great symbolism, the inner life of man moves, or seems to move, reaching out with faculties and powers we do not even realize that we have, again to grasp meaning, to penetrate appearance and reach into the fact or the reality of a thing. In Zen, of course, as in many other Oriental systems, there are grades or levels of insight. But mostly these grades and levels are not so formally listed as in Western thinking. Now, when a Western person joins an organization of some kind, particularly for philosophical or religious training, a certain time factor becomes highly significant. For instance, if we go to college and behave ourselves reasonably well, we expect to graduate in 4 years. We move from one level of that college education to another. If after graduating we wish to go on, we set aside another 2 years for our masters or something of that nature. Zen simply sits back and roars with laughter at this spectacle and asks the simple question, can you guarantee that any human being in 2 years will know anything more than he knows now? He may know what he does know a little more thoroughly, but in the course of this period of years, he will not only learn perhaps a little, but he will be addicted to new things that are not so. so that when he gets out of the college, he may be more ignorant than when he entered. But if he is there for 4 years with a reasonable grade, he will graduate. He will then be decided as educated. Time becomes very important. In religious organizations, there are probationships of 3 or 5 years, after which an individual is advanced. According to Zen, this cannot mean anything, because all it means is that the individual has to wait for 5 years, hopefully. There is no proof that this interval has any bearing upon his consciousness. The same is true of priority in business. It economically is very necessary to us. But priority means that a person is advanced after a certain number of years of service. Does this mean anything? Probably not. It merely may mean that in the intervening years he has lost so much ground that he's much less employable than when he joined the firm. But if he's there long enough, he's entitled to special consideration. So Zen sweeps time away entirely. And with it, it sweeps away the intervals of life. It sweeps away forever the idea that the man of 40 has to be better than the man of 30. And it also sweeps away from it the reverse, that the young and active person has better understanding than the older one. There is no proof of these things. They represent surfaces which Zen is attempting to penetrate. So how would they advance a man in Zen? One simple example of this is art. In the great galleries of Japan and China, there are many wonderful paintings that are done by Zen monks. A connoisseur, a knowing one, particularly one who has reached the higher degrees of Zen, can walk through the gallery and without looking at a single signature, he says, this painting is by the 1st degree man, this by the 4th, this by the 7th. They know instantly the degree of Zen which this artist has attained from the picture. They know the degree of honesty which has been achieved in this consciousness. Now, one of the favorite subjects for art in Zen is the wonderful, glowering face of the old Zen master, Daruma. He usually looks like a very unpleasant, grumbling old bear. He is very heavy set. He's supposed to have been a blue-eyed Brahmin from Nalanda in central India. But he is often represented as an older man with a rather stringy beard, a bald head, large rings in his ears, very protruding eyes, and a look upon his face as much as to say, I just caught you in a serious error. Now, many artists have attempted to portray this grim master of the sect. And as a Zen teacher said not many years ago, he said, not one of us know what Daruma looks like. There are no authentic likenesses. But everyone who paints him reveals to those who know what the artist looks like, and no more. And one will say, this painting is a 9th degree Zen man. He has painted Daruma in this way. This other one is only a beginner in the doctrine. So the grand, grave, stone-like countenance of the old Daruma takes on hundreds of different shades of expression. Sometimes this gloomy look almost disappears under the optimism of some young monk who is determined to prove that Daruma was kind-hearted. Another gets him into a very sad look, as though he was burdening the whole world with his wisdom. Seshu is supposed to have achieved the highest expression of the portraiture of Daruma. In his portraiture, the entire strength lies around the eyes of the old master. There is some look in them that seems to cut like a knife that will cut through mountains and valleys and worlds, that will cut through space itself with this strange intensity in which all the sternness has vanished and the look of inevitability has taken its place. So by the various levels of their art, they attempt to indicate not how many years you have been in Zen, but how far you have gone in Zen, which is the determination, which is important. They apply this same system to the problem of living. Realization is not determined by the fact that you have been a student for 30 years. Realization is not determined by the names of the persons under whom you have studied, or the books you have read. Realization is determined by the mysterious artistry of your own conduct. And the Zen master can tell almost instantly, from a very brief acquaintance, just exactly how far insight has gone into the life of the person. For Zen is an insight which is revealed through every thought, every word, every action. Our opinion on any passing subject of national or international interest reveals our degree of Zen in some way. The way in which we meet the irritations of our children reveals Zen. The selection of our television program reveals Zen. Everything reveals something of the motion of the deep inside of ourselves. At this time especially, it would seem in the West, where we are pretty worried about a great many things, that this experience of the deep is very, very necessary. So we can say, how can we go about getting a little of this deep in relationship to the ordinary affairs of life? Perhaps the simplest way in which the Zen attempts to achieve this is to substitute simple, often foolish things for the big things that we are interested in. When an individual gets all worked up over something, so that he hardly can bear the profundity of his own concerns, Zen might suggest that he make a flower arrangement, or that perhaps he will settle down and play with his children for a little while, or that he will go out in the garden and trim a bush. That all of a sudden he will break away from the utterly significant. Now we do this instinctively in many of our escape mechanisms. But unfortunately, if we escape only into things that are also of no value, then we lose the merit of the situation. The purpose of Zen, in what we would term its escapism, is not that we shall run away from facts, but rather that we shall run toward facts and away from illusion. The problem that we face is not the fact, but the only factual thing that perhaps we can locate in this entire situation is to go out and cut the grass. This is factual. Therefore, we move from things that are not fact towards some simple action in which the justification is immediate and inevitable in our own consciousness. To try to escape the facts by going down to the local pub and drowning oneself in some libation is not the answer. We have merely substituted one mistake for another. But somewhere we must find the fact. The fact may be a beautiful stone that has been washed by nature into a wonderful form. I saw one not long ago. It was a very beautiful piece of rock, about twice the size of a man's fist. A Japanese Zen master, for he had to have been that, placed this rock in a flat dish. Around this rock he placed sand and nothing else. But he must have worked very hard, not only to find the rock, but to place it exactly where it belonged. The rock itself was a kind of a grayish-blue color, but there was some oxidizing in it, and the presence of some other chemicals, one of which, perhaps a little iron, gave it a kind of rusty look along one edge. He arranged it so that this rusty streak was at great advantage. The rest of the stone gray, here this little touch of orange red, and he labeled the product underneath, sunset. And that is exactly what it was. You could see the light of the setting sun falling on the rock, apparently in this little stratification of orange red that ran down the rock at a certain angle as though struck by the sun. Now this man had an experience in producing this. Perhaps he did not know it was a sunset until he had arranged it. But suddenly his own innate value showed him that this was a great work of art, a work of nature, that all he had to do was place it where it belonged, give it an opportunity to be itself, and the result was a masterpiece. Now, this kind of type of escape, this moving away from the ordinary into that which is in itself strangely deep, is one way in which Zen seeks to bring consolation of consciousness to the individual. All such methods are based upon one basic principle, namely that man must discover and use wisely the eternal beauty of life. When he does this, he can prove it. This man with his rock proved something. Each person's artistry has to be the sum of his own realization. Today we need a great deal of this ability to some way be very quiet and allow the motions of great art to move through us. Now, we don't necessarily want to stand in a bowl somewhere and look like a sunset, but we do have phases of our disposition that we must labor with. And unless we have the adequate artistry, we cannot achieve this end. So whether it is a stone in a bowl or an effort to improve some weakness of our own character, we must be quiet. We must work with the elements of our problem. We must arrange them and rearrange them until our own instinct tells us they are right. Then we must continue also to labor with our own instinct. Because if we come back and arrange these elements again a year from now, the arrangement should be better. We should never continue making identically the same mistake. We must never go on through the years with always the same attitudes, unless these attitudes are grounded in a degree of enlightenment that the average person simply does not possess. But even the enlightened person must grow, so that growth becomes the ability to reveal inner integration by its effect upon everything that happens around us in the processes of living. Let us suppose for a moment, then, that we wander into some Asiatic jungle somewhere and come to the ruins of one of these great monuments that has survived the wrath and ravage of time. And somewhere there, seated quietly, is a great figure of Buddha. Perhaps we can stand behind that figure or climb up upon it and try to get something of the view of the world from the strange, quiet face of this meditating image. The Zen idea of thinking or trying to approach life from the point of view of Buddha is of interest to us. First of all, these images are everywhere almost identical in quality. They are always images of quietude, images of an incredible composure. They are created by artists or artisans, some only artisans, who had in their own lives achieved this composure. The Asiatic artist is the greatest artist in the world in creating a dynamic in an image which isn't doing anything. When we want to do something really dynamic, we create action. We will get into some involved Greco-Latin theme like the great Laocoon images, in which these tortured bodies of giants twist together in a strange conglomeration. Or we get the strange, forceful, despotic, neurotic face which Rodin gave to Balzac. We have to have action, even if it's nothing but a series of parts from an engine hung together by solder and referred to by the artist afterwards as a picture of tomorrow. Something has to be what we call impact. It has to either amaze us, amuse us, or horrify us. If it pleases us, it isn't worth hanging in a gallery. But in Asia, they have made a tremendous study of a kind of static art which has intrigued the whole world. An art which seems to touch into our own psychic life. The magnificent portrait of a world genius expressed at its best. The great teacher simply, quietly meditating. In this there is no pain of martyrdom. In this there is no gallant conversion of the world. There is simply a man sitting under a tree, looking with half-open eyes out across the surface of the world. The face is completely at rest. And if there is any expression at all upon it, there is a quiet, sometimes slightly whimsical look. The look of one who looks through things. But no matter where this face looks, it is never astonished. It is never disturbed. It is never intrigued. It looks upon the rise and fall of empires with the same eternal quietude. As near as art has been able to devise, this image represents the depth dimension of human consciousness. It is that human consciousness which first of all abides in its own eternity. This consciousness has no concept of beginning or end. This consciousness has no real experience of birth and death. It is simply forever there, contemplating the forever changing from its own point of forever the same. This formula, therefore, is essentially one of the keys to the whole Zen philosophy. It is the never-changing, able to accept the ever-changing, the relationship between these two. The never-changing is truth. The never-changing is eternal purpose. The never-changing in our way of thinking is the endless motion of the heavens, the alternation of summer and winter, the coming of the rain and the snow, the return of birds in the spring. These things are the never-changing. More deep than this, however, are the laws by which all these things move, the great cyclic patterns which seem to cry out to us in every manifestation of existence. They are the song of the bird. They are the arenda of the Iroquois Indian. They are the manna of the South Pacific. The ever-nourishing, sustaining, preserving, and supporting. Yet in the deep, wonderful cup of the never-changing will be found all the compounds of the forever-changing. So man has one of two points of view. He must either establish himself on the foundation of the never-changing or upon the shifting sand of the ever-changing. Perhaps this is the parable of the two men who built their houses, one upon sand and the other upon rock. And the one who built his house upon the sand, according to the Gospel of St. Matthew, this man found that the winds and the storms came, and his house was blown down. The other man built his upon the rock, and the winds and the storms came, but the house stood. Strangely enough, a couple of Christian writers, analyzing this problem of the parable of the two houses, came of reasons we do not know just why. Perhaps a little Zen got in there by mistake. One of them said, I wonder about this house that was built on rock. Did he mean that he built it on a promontory of rock? Or did he mean that he put the basements or the foundations down to rock? Well, there's a fine theological question. And these authors came to the conclusion that in terms of modern architecture, the best thing to have done was to have put the foundations deeper. Then the house would stand if the foundations went down to the rock. So we try to build that way, even in modern architecture. Unless we are building a bargain, then we build on sand and it falls apart. The house built upon the rock certainly represents a way of life or a life pattern built upon adequate foundation, going down to the rock, going down to the heart or core of the thing. This is the living and eternal substance. This is the Zen concept of the entire problem. So if we build our house of our attitudes or our way of life or our associations or our business, any of these things upon the shifting substances of our own opinions or the opinions of those around us, we will ultimately find that this house will collapse. But if we dig the foundations deep, searching for the fact of the thing, building upon the deepest truth that we know, then our house has a great and wonderful support. But this rock is an invisible rock, and to those who do not understand it, is the most precarious and unstable of all foundations. Because man in Zen builds upon the foundation of silence. He builds upon the foundation of something he cannot even define. He builds his foundation upon the mere but tremendous concept of depth itself. He achieves or strives to achieve the dimension of depth. Now this dimension of depth he finds strangely near the surface of his life. It is not so that he must dig a mine or a vast shaft thousands of feet into the ground to find this. He observes that the depth dimension of himself is really more available than most people realize. The only thing we have to do is give it a chance, give it a means of functioning. So by means of his symbols and his allegories and his little koans and all these things that he has, the Zen monk tries to give us kihin, the sense of value. He tells us that by gaining a comprehension of relative values, we can face many emergencies much more safely than we do today. Now, in the pressure of Zen, certain things have to go. And one of the things that has to go is man's final judgment upon man. One thing that Zen points out is that our final judgment is based not upon value, but upon our own mood, or upon our own advantage. The man who threatens our business is a bad man. The man who gives us something is a good man. Those who let us do as we please, we consider to be friendly. Those who might like to suggest that we do better are the strangers we do not wish to hear any more about. This is the way we measure things. So in Zen, we have to give up these estimates and these measures. Let's see how this works out in world problems as we have them at the moment. We now have two great systems of thought locked. A system which we call democracy and a system which we call communism. As far as I can learn, democracy is not too sure of what it is, and communism is not too sure of what it is. Actually, these are tremendous intensities of man. Intensities founded upon convictions. And with these intensities, we must live. Now, it isn't possible for us to say that we can prevent these intensities from coming into any kind of a clash that arises in society. We can hope they will not. We will know that the world basically does not want them to come to a head-on collision. But as persons, we have to live with this. Now, how are we going to live with it? Some will say that one must save the world. The other will say that one is destroying the world. And depending on which camp you're in, the other one is wrong. What is the Zen attitude towards a situation of this nature? The Zen attitude is very simple, namely that we will continue to have this situation, and we will have one after another strong and ambitious men rise to rule the world. And this will go on indefinitely until man discovers a simple fact, namely that he can't rule the world. Because the world already has a ruler which no man can depose. And that ruler is law. Behind all of the various changes and vicissitudes that we know are immutable laws, moving immutably to their own ends. These are the deep, dark mysteries under the surfaces of things. For if man goes down in himself far enough, he will find, as in some strange subterranean cavern, a great river running through space. And this river is the law of life itself. This law is fulfilling itself forever. And there is nothing that man can do to prevent it. The only thing that man can do that is meaningful is to seek to discover in his consciousness that which is already unconsciously there, namely the law of the river. He must find ultimately that the security or survival of his kind depends entirely upon his conscious recognition of the rule of life. Now, if in the course of a problem of this kind, millions of human beings are thrown into emergencies, what are these emergencies? In the terms of nature, an emergency is the victory of ignorance over insight. The individual who is frightened because in some way he doesn't believe in the truth. He is frightened because he honestly suspects that something can happen to him that isn't according to the law. He is afraid that somewhere this great stream of immortality will be destroyed by an atomic bomb. He is afraid that the eternal pattern that lives in space will be outwitted by a half a dozen dictators on this planet. If he is Zen, however, he cannot fall under that illusion. Now he will say perhaps also, but what is he going to do? He can't help the fears that are natural to his kind. And to a measure, this is the only answer that most people will have. Namely, that they will have to learn through a series of experiences that these experiences themselves are not real. But until they find it out, these experiences have to remain real for them. But the Zen monk, attaining to a certain reasonably elevated degree within his own discipline, is able, by the attainment of the meditation realization process, of gradually feeling the rising tide of the river of life. It not only moves through him, but he begins to experience its substance. Zen is an experience, not a doctrine. If we were told it, we could forget it. But what we live, it is difficult for us to forget. So Zen meditation suddenly comes into the realization of a universe beyond process, beyond all of these things which we commonly call life. As long as we live on this level of life, we can die. As long as we live on this level of life, our civilizations can be swept away. But everything that is good in civilization, everything that is real in art, science, music, literature, drama, everything that has a real existence, has a real existence only because it is a manifestation of reality. And this great stream of reality which exists cannot be destroyed by anybody. All of the works of art that man has created can be destroyed, but art cannot be injured. And if these things are destroyed, nature in its infinite motion will create new forms and restore them. And out of the unknown will come artists who are not of our day, because art cannot die. Truth cannot die. Wisdom cannot die. Because these things are expressions of that which no man can touch. There is no power on the whole earth of torture or of misdirection or of subjective suggestion or of brainwashing that can touch this inner core. The individual's conscious mind may be corrupted or destroyed, but the motion of reality in him is untouchable. So Zen feels that if we can get hold of this value of the unchanging, essential eternity of life, that in this life is not merely some existence in space, but that in this life is consciousness, that in this life is the root of all intelligence, but that instead of being the kind of consciousness that we know, which differs from all others, It is this eternal consciousness, forever generating in and from itself every form, every structure, every purpose known to man. Once the person becomes aware of this, he can readapt his point of view. He can release his mind from the fear that evil will win and come to the inevitable conclusion that there is only one thing that can ever win, and that is reality itself, the eternal moving in space. That this eternal is sufficient unto all days and to eternity and time. That man himself is this thing. That man's appearances may change, that his fortunes may seem to vary, that one day he will be under good government and another day under a less good government, but that man as a being is an eternal fact, moving with eternity itself to the ends which eternity demands. Nothing can stop him. Nothing can injure him. Nothing can destroy him. The only thing that can most definitely, temporarily damage him is his own failure to know this. For out of the failure to realize that he cannot lose, he attempts to protect his way of winning. Not being able to be destroyed, he tries to stay alive. Not being capable, actually, of being dominated by any other thing, he fights from morn till night to try to keep a little vestige of personal liberty. He is simply unable to get down to the level where the truths are. Once he gets there and experiences these truths, you can never fool him again. So the purpose of Zen, then, in its disciplines of realization, is to attempt to help the individual to see the entire universe with the Buddha eye. This is the mysterious eye, which if it is single, the body is filled with light. This Buddha eye is the eye of the person at complete peace with life, suddenly looking over a world of chaos, and observe this chaos slowly falling into order until all that remains is a little windstorm set up by men upon the surface of an eternal ocean established forever in space. That consequently we can face these vicissitudes with a reasonable hope. That we can eliminate most of the conflict. For as Buddha himself knew, our real worries are not the states of nations. Our real worries are what these states will mean to us in terms of our possessions, of our liberties, of our happiness, or perhaps merely of our pleasure. But beneath all of these things are these motions, and once the mind accepts this, sees it, and understands it, it proceeds to reduce tensions and pressures to their minimum, according to the level of insight that has been attained. The first degree Zen man worries less than the no degree Zen man. The fifth degree worries less than the fourth degree. And there comes a time when what we call worry simply ceases, because the illusion which creates the thing to be worried about is no longer there. And once man knows the facts, he does not worry. Not because he is thoughtless and irresponsible, but because how are you going to worry about yourself when nothing that is real about yourself can be injured in any way? And the only thing that you can lose is something the ownership of which you invented. and which you never actually had. It's like the man who is, having lost his fortune, retires to his office and blows his brains out because it was taken away from him while he lived. 10 years later, by natural causes, that man would have died, and his fortune would have again left him. But this would have been natural, according to his thinking. Therefore, to die and leave it all is not a great disaster because it is inevitable. But to leave it or lose it before you die is a great disaster. Therefore, blow your brains out and make the two events concur. This is our way of working out a mess, which gets more messy the more we work on it. If, on the other hand, we had recognized the Zen principles, that the things we have flow with life, that one day it is rich to be wealthy, the next day it is rich to be poor. We do not know what the facts are. But underneath this whole thing, great laws are working. Laws that bring us what we need. Laws that keep us in the balance of our own conduct. Laws that bring to us what we deserve. All these great laws are forever working. And in these laws we have the key to our own way of life, keeping the law. And in quietude we can experience this, and it is enough. But in confusion we can no longer hold the experience. So Zen tries to help us to build a greater capacity to hold the experience of the internal, eternal, which is ourselves. For in this we are citizens of space and eternity, and all the things that happen to us are only of the moment. We may regret them, we may wish a little bit they were otherwise, but as we grow further, our complaint will be absorbed in an eternal admiration for the wonder of the thing as it is, the magnificence and the dignity of the real facts. And we discover that we have not been left cast away on a little ball in space, but that rather that we are eternally involved in and part of a universal consciousness that knows all things necessary and purposeful. To sense this, to achieve it, is Zen, and to live it is to move victoriously through one level of this philosophy to another. And in our times, I think more thinking in this direction might do a little good, especially among persons who are inclined to be over-agitated. Time is up, so we have to stop. Now, in the next few weeks, we want to take philosophy and apply it to some of the immediate issues. So, in the terms of our Zen of the morning and a little psychoanalysis, which we will develop as the need arises, our subject next Sunday is humanity at the Brandenburg Gate. Here is humanity, a term for the long and the old and the wise. Something that has existed on this planet, according to the most conservative men now, for probably more than 1 million years, perhaps 100 million years. And the whole great tide of human motion has been fouled up at a little gate between two halves of a city. A little Zen needed here to straighten this one out. Speaking about Zen also, here is a little note that I think is rather nice. Probably most of you know of the Goodwill Industries of Southern California. In cooperation, believe it or not, with the Church Federation of Los Angeles, the Goodwill Industries are holding a special festival and exhibit of religion and art. And, believe it or not, in cooperation with the Church Federation of Los Angeles, a considerable section of this exhibit will be devoted to comparative religion, and the Church Federation seemingly is going to devote considerable thought to non-Christian religious groups, including Buddhism and other schools. The third floor exhibit for this group is, which you will find here, is very largely contributed from our humble collection. So that in cooperation with some others, we are supplying most of the Oriental art and some of the Southwest Penitentiary art for this exhibit. If you are interested in attending this exhibit, and I believe that there's a listing in here somewhere of the dates and things of that nature. Open house Thursday, October 5th through Sunday, October 8th. You're interested in this, we recommend that you pick up one of these little folders, which we will have for you at the desk or at the tables as you leave. If you have no interest in going or are not going, we ask you not to take the folder because we don't have very many, and we would certainly like the people who are going to have a chance. So please be thoughtful in that respect. This afternoon upstairs, our local study group, that is the center study group of our society here, will meet after the lecture this morning to discuss the subject of the morning. We think this will be a subject you may all want to think a little more about, perhaps mention or discuss, talk about and think about. So we hope you'll be there this afternoon. On Monday evening, October 2nd, the men's group of the Philosophical Research Society is going to have dinner on Monday, October 2nd, 1961 at 7 p.m. And now where do you suppose they're going to have it? At the Blarney Castle. I'm sure that's a fine place for a meeting. And the Blarney Castle Restaurant at 623 Western Avenue at 7 o'clock, there's going to be a meeting of the men's group for the purpose of considering various projects and activities and ways of means to help advance the cause of our society. And on that occasion, Dr. Framrose Bode will tell the friends who have gathered there about his interview with the Dalai Lama of Tibet. So if you're interested, we hope that you will arrange to reserve a ticket for this dinner, which will be held at the Blarney Castle. So we hope you'll all be there for this very important meeting. This morning we might call to your attention a booklet we have called Buddha's Sermon on the Mount, which we think would be helpful. And also our little pamphlet, The Interpretation of the Tract of the Quiet Way, which has to do with Taoism, which was one of the fountains from which Zen sprang. So we think that this quietude situation is worthy of a lot of thought, and that when things become so difficult that we hardly know what to do with them, that we will do what the Zen master does, get out our little pad and paint a picture of a tree. This will give us not only a lot of peace of mind, but give us the opportunity of explaining to our friends later, not our Zen, but that it was a tree that we drew. This might be one of the problems that arises early, but as Zen has found out, a man who can draw a tree is a far happier man than a man who can see 1,000 trees, because he's done something himself. He has given something out of his own consciousness, his own effort. And if he is thoughtful, someday he will draw trees like ninth degree Zen masters. It's all a problem of his own growth. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you next week.